Welcome to Story District Presents, a podcast for people who love live storytelling. I'm Amy Sedman, your host, and the director of Story District, a nonprofit in Washington, D.C. that's been dedicated to teaching and showcasing the art of storytelling since 1997. In each episode, we bring you a story from one of our shows. Then, we meet with the storyteller to find out more about the story behind the story. This season is all about the 7 deadly sins, and today we bring you a story by Caitlin Reilly about the sin of lust, intense or unbridled sexual desire. Caitlin performed this story at our annual Valentine's show, Sucker for Love. Here's Caitlin.
After I graduated college, I moved back to DC, and like any underemployed liberal arts major, I decided to focus my time and energy on finding love. The first thing that I did as part of this plan was join a soccer team, as you do when you're looking for love. The plan was not successful. Most of the passes my teammates made were actual passes. And even that didn't happen very often. Because of the patriarchy. One night we were playing, and I was running up the center of the field, and one of my teammates crossed the ball in from the side. And I realized the ball's coming right at me, and I think, this is my chance. I'll kick this ball, I'll score a goal, I'll finally prove myself as a soccer player, and some guy on my team will finally notice me and think, she's a really good soccer player. Maybe she should be my girlfriend. So I run up, I kick the ball, I hit it one touch, and it sails off my foot. And for a second, I know it's a goal. And then it hits a defender's shin, ricochets up, and hits me in the face. And the vision in one eye instantly goes dark. And I know it's bad because my fellow girl teammates are coming up to me and I'm covering my eye and they're like, show us. And I'm like, no, I think I'm okay. I'll just keep playing like this, it's fine. And then they get me to take my hand away and I do. And they look at me and they're like, oh my God. It's fine, you'll be fine. You look great. So I go to the emergency room. And I see the on-call ophthalmology resident. And as he's examining my eye, he's asking me where I'm from and what I do. At the time, I was a temp at NPR, and my only task was editing old web copy for a new website, which really just involved deleting Oxford commas. So I tell the eye doctor, I call myself the serial comma killer. And he laughed in a way that indicated, A, he knew what a serial comma was, and B, that he set a very low bar for puns. And somewhere through the haze of fear and a concussion, I thought, he likes grammar too. Nice. My eye doctor tells me that my eye is seriously injured. My eye's bleeding and the pupil's being obscured by blood, which is why I can't see. And while it heals, I'll have to wear an eye patch and go on bed rest and come back in for daily appointments because if anything goes wrong, I could go blind permanently. So every day I'd come in and the eye doctor would say something like, I listened to NPR on my way in today. I don't know how they've survived so long without you. And we'd laugh because we both knew I wasn't important. And then I would follow up with really specific questions about ophthalmology because I spend a lot of time on WebMD ordinarily, and having something diagnosably wrong with me had only lent a sense of purpose to my hobby. And it was during these daily appointments I started to realize that my eye doctor was literally and figuratively a sight for sore eyes. And not only that, but through offhand comments and internet research, I learned we had a lot in common. He grew up in Maryland, I grew up in DC. Based on graduation dates, I estimated his age to be somewhere between 28 and 31. I was 22, which is also an age. Before going to med school, he taught high school. Around that same time, I attended high school as a student. He was a doctor, I was a hypochondriac. We just made sense. At the time, I had these very indulgent roommates, and every night at dinner, we would discuss the subtext of that day's appointment. And I would say things like, you know, I think my eye doctor likes me because he always asks me how I'm feeling. And he wants to know when he's going to see me again. And like, sometimes when we're together, like, we don't even have to talk. We can just gaze deeply into each other's eyes. Now, what my roommate should have said was, that's because he's your eye doctor. Instead, what they said was, of course he likes you. You're great. We love you. My roommates also were my parents. One night I suffered a setback and my roommate father had to rush me to the hospital at 2 a.m. And after the doctor was done checking me out, he said, you know, we have to stop meeting like this. And my dad and I look at each other and we're like, nice. Because obviously, that means that we should start meeting in some other way. Like at a bar for drinks, or to meet his parents, or at the church where we're getting married. And so I begin to think maybe that crossed soccer ball wasn't my chance to impress the soccer guys. Maybe it was my chance to meet my eye doctor. Maybe the ball that blinded me is actually Cupid's arrow. Maybe this is my destiny. So a couple weeks later, as my final appointment arrived and it became time to say goodbye to my doctor forever, I decided that instead I would ask him out. And I talked to a lot of people, friends, family members, roommates, and we brainstormed a plan. One of the first plans that we discussed was that during my final vision test, I should just say, sorry, doc, all I can see is you and I. Which which, while it had flair and appealed to my doctor's appreciation of bad puns, that plan had to be rejected because that sentence is grammatically unsound. And grammar was like our thing. So what we settled on was that I should hand him a business card on my way out and then just say, since you're not my doctor anymore, and waltz out with the implications still hanging in the air. Which had the advantage of minimizing the window for an in-person rejection. The day of the appointment arrived. I borrowed a dress from my youngest roommate sister. And it was just a little too tight and a little too short because she was 14 and I was an adult. But the important thing was that it had a pocket into which I then put my business card, which actually was not a business card because I was a temp. What it was a card that we had stuck in my high school graduation announcements, and it was shaped like a business card, but all it had on it was my engraved full name. And I had painstakingly handwritten my number next to it. So I get to the doctor's office, and the attending doctor, Dr. Wilson, is standing there with my doctor boyfriend, which is not a part of the plan. And then she goes on to explain all of the things that are still wrong with my eye, which is really not a part of the plan. And as she's explaining the complications, I start to panic. I'm thinking, oh my God, if I go back to playing soccer, I'll have to wear rec specs, so I'll never meet anyone that way. And my pupils might stay 2 different sizes, and symmetry is something we subconsciously look for in a mate. I'm damaged goods. I'll never find love. This is my last chance. And Dr. Wilson walks out, and my doctor fiance looks at me. And he says, do you need me to explain that to you again? And he does. And as he's explaining this a second time, I put my hand in my pocket, and I start to turn the card over and over. And as I'm turning the card, a thought occurs to me. And it's that this plan is really inappropriate. I think this qualifies as workplace harassment, which is upsetting because always when I'd pictured harassment in the workplace, I thought I'd be the victim, not the perpetrator. And then I think, well, I don't have to go through with this. I don't have to do this. And then, but no, I've told too many people. I wrote a letter to my grandmother. And I realized that when my doctor husband stops talking, I'll have to execute this plan that I'm losing confidence in by the second. And suddenly the room begins to feel very warm, and the dress that was just a little too tight is very constricting, and it's getting harder to breathe. And I look up, and he's stopped talking. And I reach into my pocket to pull out the card, and I faint. I pass out. When I wake up, the room is full of people. The attending doctor is back in, and she's lifting up my legs to get blood to my head, and I'm trying to check my pocket for the card, and at the same time, keep the skirt that's just a little too short from flying up. And she sees me trying to fix my skirt, and she yells at my eye doctor, and she's like, Dr. Goodman, get behind her. Don't worry, I won't let him get fresh with you. And I'm like, I wish he would get fresh with me. So they wheel me over to the emergency room. The doctors run all sorts of tests. My roommate parents show up. And they're like, so, like, did you do it? No, I fainted. And the doctors bring the test results back, and of course they don't find anything because there's nothing wrong with me physically. And my parents take me home to the family group house. And I never saw the doctor again. I know. I did go back to playing soccer. I have to wear rec specs, which I found are a primitive but highly effective form of birth control. So I've not met anyone that way either, but I'm keeping my good eye open.
So, oh my gosh, I have a couple pressing questions about the story. So you mentioned that you and your parents sat down to brainstorm. I mean, your roommates, excuse me, to brainstorm how to ask the doctor out. Is that true? Your parents were on board with this?
Yeah. So my parents, I think, were encouraging, but not like invested. Like they were like, do what you want to do. You're 22 years old. But like at this time, I was like emailing like lots of people about this. Like I was emailing like people from college. I was like in in-depth conversations with one of my cousins being like, do you think he likes me? Like this was like, I had friends come to the show and they're like, you G-chatted me about this for like every day for like 2 months. So I was brainstorming plans with a lot of different people.
So they were all enabling this behavior? Did no one try to stop you?
No, everyone was really encouraging. Like, I think the stakes for everyone else were like kind of low. I don't think they cared very much. But for me, I like worked myself up and I was like, what if we got married? Like, this is such an amazing story. The like wedding toasts like write themselves. I was very invested.
Is there anything that you left out of the story that you want to mention?
So that's the end of the story in the show. And it is true that I never saw him again. But I did track down his email. And under the guise of sending a thank you note, because everyone does that to their doctors, like emailed him and he emailed me back. And I felt the tone in his response showed that he was interested. And so I followed up asking him out.
So do you have that email?
Yes, I can read it for you.
We definitely want to hear that.
Okay. Well, so I didn't look at this until I got here this morning. And the really funny part is all of the people I forwarded it to and asked for their feedback. So I wrote like, hi, this is Caitlin, you know, the fainter. Remember me? I wanted to track you down and to tell you my soccer team made playoffs. Also, you should know that with this comeback, people are beginning to call me the Michael Jordan of Rec League Soccer. If it ever comes up in conversation, Michael Jordan is the only sports person I know, and I happen to know he like came back later for a season. So I was like really proud of that.
You also just called him a sports person.
Yeah.
Some say athlete, but no, sports person is also like, fine.
I'm a cool girl who knows sports, and now he knows that about me. Anyway, I wanted to say thanks for everything, since I'm pretty sure I didn't say it when I last saw you, as I was unconscious at the time. Hope all is well with you. Thanks, Caitlin.
Okay.
And then
clever.
He
snappy.
wrote, yeah, he was like, hey, Caitlin, of course I remember you. It's a pretty select... he used the wrong it's. So maybe he wasn't that into grammar. Maybe I projected that on him. I appreciate the update, although I was picturing you less as Jordan and more like this guy, and he linked to a different sports person who wears rec specs. And then he signed with his first name.
Wow.
And I was like, a joke, a link, first name, like we are going to bang. I was like, yeah, I'm going to respond to this. So I wrote again. Unfortunately, our championship hopes were cruelly dashed early on in the playoffs. We won our last game, though, so there's hope for the summer season. P.S. I'm a bit offended. You compared me to the player most notable for not being in the Hall of Fame. Clearly, I had to Google that. Outrageous. I may have to write you out of the acceptance speech. I will be willing to hear your case over a beer, though. And then he never replied.
Oh.
I like to believe it was because he was my doctor and it was inappropriate, not because I don't write a good email.
I would agree that is the reason. So I want to say, like, I love your storytelling style, but in part, I think this story is such a great example of an internal voice. So we coach people a lot, so tell us what happened and then what you're thinking. What happened and what you're thinking. And some people really struggle with it. But this is a great example of what you can get out of a story by sharing your internal thoughts. And there's a lot of vulnerability in that, but there's a lot of comedy because there's this kind of sort of radical honesty about it. And so you're able to make fun of yourself, but we're along for the ride and we're rooting for you.
Yeah, well, and I think it was helpful. Like, this is the first story I told, and it is, I think, for finding that inner voice is helpful that this is a story that occurs even at the time we find out entirely in my head.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Like, there is no way that if I just was like, I hurt my eye, I had to go to the doctor once a day, he was cordial, that people were like, yeah, you're going to marry him.
Yeah. But I love it because you're really sharing a lot about you have this very strong desire, which a good story needs. And you set the stakes because it really does matter to you. A, you wanted to meet somebody. B, now you're in this situation where you're actually going through something difficult and you're reaching out to this. This is kind of a thing to keep you going, I guess. And the whole bit about, writing out the card and having it in your pocket, there's so much tension in that moment. And it actually feels like this action-packed moment, even though, again, it's still mostly in your head. This guy has no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
What made you audition to tell a story?
I auditioned for Sucker for Love. I had never even been to a storytelling show before. I'd been doing some improv and thought maybe I wanted to try stand-up comedy. And I was like, I can't limit myself to 5 minutes. And the audiences are kind of mean. And if I did this, I get 10 minutes and it's a big audience. But I had told this story socially forever. Because it was the craziest thing that had ever happened to me. I'd fainted because of blood and stuff, but I didn't know people in 2014 or whatever this was fainted because they were overcome with emotions. It was when you hear about women in the 1800s had the vapors. I didn't know that you could do that not wearing a corset. I didn't know that happened. So Sucker for Love was the first show I did. And there were 4 months of rehearsals. But it was this process that I imagine is a lot like being in a writer's room where everyone comes with their own work. Obviously, these are stories that happen to you. But it was really wonderful to have the feedback I don't really understand that, or I don't find that part credible, or try this joke here, or you have too many puns and you're at 14 minutes, please cut some stuff. Yeah, I wish there were more opportunities to go through that process.
Is there a particular piece of advice that you would share with our listeners about any aspect of telling a story?
So a bunch of friends from the Sucker for Love show and I, after every Story District show, we like get together and we go over all of the stories. Like one of them takes notes. And it's like for memory, not criticism, but that's how into stories we are. And I think the biggest thing we come back to, like when telling a story, is like the really great stories have a like great deal of self-awareness. And stories that don't land, it's often like it's because like they're so connected to it that they don't see how they could be perceived by someone not in it. And so I think like self-awareness is the biggest thing. And then the thing that I like never leave myself enough time for, I don't end up really making a story good until I've memorized it. Like the more I can just like pace around on a metro platform and go over the words again and again, like the more like jokes come to mind or like awkward wording gets edited out. The biggest thing that I came out of Sucker for Love with was a group of people that I felt really comfortable bouncing ideas off of and really like collaborate with creatively. And I think that is so rare in adult life, just because like there's not a lot of infrastructure to find those people. And I feel really lucky that I did.
Kate, thanks so much for being here. It was great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
That's it for this episode of Story District Presents. We're so glad you're listening, and if you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends, and most importantly, keep listening. To get tickets to a show, sign up for a class, pitch a story of your own, or hire our consulting team, visit storydistrict.org. And once again, we're raising money for Season 3. Your donation will help make this happen. This show is made possible in part with funding from the D.C. Commission on the Arts and Humanities. Our show is produced by Lizzie Peabody, Ronald Young Jr., Ilana Nevins, Nick Hill, Tim St. Clair, and Jackson Bierfeldt. And special thanks to Caitlin Reilly for joining us in the studio. I'm Amy Sedman, and this is Story District Presents. We'll see you next time. In the studio today, we have Caitlin Reilly.
Hi.
In today's episode, we have with us Caitlin Reilly.
Hi.
That's the keeper.
Your face. That's how I talk. Please don't make fun of me. It's a disability.